My name is Eloise Johnson, and I am 67 years old. After 4 decades as an elementary school teacher, I finally bought my dream cabin in the Colorado mountains. I thought retirement would bring peace, but instead it brought an unexpected battle when my son-in-law tried to commandeer my new home for his parents. Little did he know that after a lifetime of giving in, I had prepared a special welcome surprise that would change everything. Before I tell you how I stood my ground after 40 years of always putting others first, drop a comment letting me know if you have ever had to protect your boundaries. And if you appreciate stories about reclaiming your power, hit that subscribe button. For 40 years, I dedicated my life to teaching third graders in a public school in Denver. Every day, I poured my heart and soul into those children, staying late to help struggling students, spending my own money on classroom supplies, and giving up countless weekends to grade papers and plan lessons. Teaching was more than a job for me. It was a calling, and I loved watching those young minds blossom under my care. My late husband Walter always supported my dedication to teaching. He worked as an accountant for a local construction company, and together we built a modest life. We never had much money, but we had enough. Walter would often say, "Ellie, one day, when we retire, we will find a little cabin in the mountains where you can paint and I can fish." It was our shared dream, something we planned for throughout our marriage. We had one daughter, Amanda. She was our pride and joy, though raising her as a teacher and an accountant meant we could not give her everything other children had. Still, we managed to help her through college, and 5 years ago, at 33, she married Jackson Tanner, a software developer 10 years her senior. I had my reservations about Jackson from the beginning. There was something about his smile that never quite reached his eyes, and the way he spoke to Amanda sometimes made me uncomfortable. But she seemed happy, and that was all that mattered to me. 3 years ago, Walter suffered a massive heart attack while working in our garden. One moment he was planting tomatoes and the next he was gone. The grief was overwhelming. After 42 years of marriage, I found myself alone at 64. The only silver lining was the life insurance policy Walter had insisted on maintaining all those years. It was not a fortune, but combined with our savings and my teacher pension, it meant I would be financially secure. The year after Walter died, I continued living in our small apartment in Denver. But the city had changed over the decades. The rent kept increasing, the traffic grew worse, and the noise from the street kept me awake at night. I missed Walter terribly, and everything in the apartment reminded me of him. I needed a change. That was when I remembered our dream of a mountain cabin. Walter might be gone, but perhaps I could still honor that dream. I started looking at properties in the mountains about 2 hours from Denver. Most were far too expensive, but I kept searching. For almost a year, I drove up to the mountains every weekend looking at cabins for sale, getting to know the different communities. Then one day I found it. A small, 2-bedroom log cabin on 3 acres of land, nestled among pine trees with a view of the mountains that took my breath away. The moment I stepped onto the property, I felt Walter's presence. This was it. This was our dream. The cabin needed some work, but it was structurally sound. The price was at the very top of my budget, but with careful financial planning, I could make it work. I sold most of our furniture, keeping only a few precious items that reminded me of Walter. I used a chunk of the insurance money for the down payment and moved into my mountain sanctuary 6 months ago. Those first few weeks were the most peaceful I had experienced since Walter's death. I would wake up early, sit on the porch with my coffee, and watch the sunrise paint the mountains gold. During the day, I would work on small renovation projects, plant a garden, or explore the hiking trails near my property. In the evenings, I would set up my easel near the large living room window and paint the changing light on the mountains. The cabin itself was not fancy, but it was perfect for me. The main floor had an open-plan living room and kitchen with large windows overlooking the mountains. There was a small bathroom and the main bedroom where I set up my queen-sized bed with Walter's grandmother's quilt. Upstairs was a loft that I had converted into my reading nook with bookshelves built into the walls and a comfortable armchair. The second bedroom was downstairs, and I had been slowly converting it into an art studio. I was beginning to make friends in the small mountain community too. There was Harriet, a 75-year-old widow who lived about a mile down the road and walked 5 miles every day, regardless of the weather. And Tom and David, a retired couple who owned the local hardware store and had given me invaluable advice on cabin maintenance. I joined the local library book club and volunteered at the community garden on Wednesdays. For the first time since Walter died, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was building a new life, one that honored our dreams, but was uniquely mine. The cabin represented not just a home, but a promise to myself that it was okay to prioritize my own happiness. After decades of giving to others, this was my time. Little did I know that my peaceful retirement was about to be disrupted in ways I never could have imagined. Amanda and Jackson had not visited since I moved into the cabin. Amanda had called regularly, but Jackson was always too busy with work to make the 2-hour drive from Denver. I was not particularly disappointed by his absence, but I missed my daughter terribly. So when Amanda called to say they would come for the weekend, I was overjoyed. I spent days cleaning, preparing their room, and planning meals. I wanted everything to be perfect. They arrived on a Friday evening in Jackson's sleek black SUV. Amanda rushed out of the car and hugged me tightly. "Mom, this is incredible," she said, looking around at the property. The pictures did not do it justice. Jackson was slower to emerge, surveying the property with calculating eyes before offering me a brief hug. "Quaint," he said in a tone that made it clear he did not mean it as a compliment. "Smaller than I expected." I chose to ignore his comment and ushered them inside, eager to show them what I had done with the place. Amanda was appropriately enthusiastic, exclaiming over the views and the cozy interior. Jackson remained largely silent, though I caught him opening closets and checking the water pressure in the bathroom. I had prepared a special dinner of Walter's favorite pot roast, and as we sat down to eat, Amanda filled me in on her job at the marketing firm and their life in Denver. Jackson ate quickly, barely contributing to the conversation, until he suddenly looked up. "This is a lot of space for just one person, Eloise," he said, gesturing around the cabin. "2 bedrooms, 3 acres. Seems wasteful." "I use every inch," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "The second bedroom is becoming my art studio." "Art studio," he repeated, as if the concept was foreign to him. "But you could fit a whole family in here." Something about the way he said family made me uneasy, but I smiled and changed the subject, asking Amanda about her friend Sarah's new baby. The next morning over breakfast, Jackson brought up his parents, Harold and Patricia. I had met them a few times at family gatherings and found them pleasant enough, if a bit entitled, like their son. "Their condo is being sold," Jackson explained, buttering his toast with precise movements. "The owner is converting the building to luxury apartments, so they have to be out by next month." "Oh, that is too bad," I said, genuinely sympathetic. "Are they finding a new place easily?" Jackson exchanged a quick glance with Amanda, who suddenly became very interested in her coffee. "Well, that is the thing," Jackson continued. "The housing market in Denver is insane right now. They are struggling to find something in their price range." "I hope they find something soon," I said, not yet realizing where this conversation was heading. "They might need a temporary place to stay," Jackson said casually, though there was nothing casual about the way he watched my reaction. "Just until they find something permanent." "Could they stay with you and Amanda?" I asked. "You have that spare room in your condo." Jackson laughed as if I had made a joke. "Our place is half the size of this cabin, Eloise. Besides, we both work long hours. They would be alone all day." "The spare bedroom here would be perfect for them," Amanda interjected quickly, not meeting my eyes. "Just temporarily, Mom. They are family after all." I felt my heart sink as I realized what they were suggesting. My peaceful retirement, my sanctuary, my space to finally live for myself after decades of serving others, was being eyed as a solution to someone else's problem. "I am sorry, but I do not think that would work," I said as gently as I could. "I am still settling in myself, and as I mentioned, I am converting the spare room into my studio." Jackson's expression hardened. "I am sure your art hobby can wait. We are talking about family here, Eloise." The way he dismissed my passion for painting as a hobby stung, but I held my ground. "I understand they are in a difficult situation, but this is not the right solution." The rest of the weekend had an undercurrent of tension. Jackson made several more comments about the wasted space in my cabin, and how family property should benefit everyone. Each time Amanda would look uncomfortable but say nothing to contradict her husband. The tension came to a head at dinner on Saturday night. Jackson, after his third glass of wine, started making plans without asking me. The upstairs loft would be perfect for storage of my parents' things, he said, as if the decision had already been made. And they can bring their own bed for the spare room. Patricia will probably want to redecorate a bit, but that will just improve the place. Jackson, I said firmly, setting down my fork. I appreciate your concern for your parents, but I am not offering my home as a solution to their housing issue. I have worked hard for this place, and I need my own space. Jackson's face flushed with anger. You live here all alone, Eloise. Do you know how selfish that sounds? My parents need help, and you have the means to provide it, but choose not to. That is not fair, I protested, looking to Amanda for support, but she stared at her plate in silence. What is not fair is having family who will not help in a crisis, Jackson snapped. But we will discuss this more later. I can see you are being stubborn tonight. The rest of the evening passed in uncomfortable small talk, and the next morning Jackson and Amanda left earlier than planned. Amanda hugged me at the door, whispering, "He will come around, Mom. Just give him time." But the look in Jackson's eyes as they drove away told me this matter was far from settled. I watched their car disappear down the mountain road with a growing sense of anxiety. My peaceful sanctuary suddenly felt threatened, and the daughter I had always been able to count on seemed unable or unwilling to stand up for me. For the first time since moving to my dream cabin, I closed the door feeling not peace but a sense of impending conflict that made my stomach knot with dread. A week passed without a word from Amanda or Jackson. I tried to return to my routine, painting in the mornings, walking in the afternoons, reading in the evenings, but a cloud of anxiety hung over everything. I jumped every time the phone rang, and I found myself looking nervously down the driveway, half expecting to see Jackson's black SUV appear unannounced. Then on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, as I was mixing colors for a landscape painting, my phone rang. It was Jackson, not Amanda. That alone was unusual enough to make my hand shake as I answered. "Hello, Jackson. How are you?" "Cut the small talk, Eloise," he said, his voice cold. "I am calling to let you know that my parents will be moving into your cabin next month, June 15th to be exact." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. "Excuse me." "My parents," he repeated slowly, as if talking to a child. "They need a place to stay, and you have the room. It is decided." "Decided by whom?" I asked, my voice rising. "Certainly not by me. This is my home, Jackson, and I have already told you that having your parents move in is not an option." "Look, Eloise," Jackson said, his tone shifting to one of condescending patience. "You are all alone in a house meant for a family. It makes no sense. My parents need somewhere to live, and that second bedroom is just sitting there. This arrangement works for everyone. It does not work for me." I insisted, my heart pounding. "And this is my house, paid for with my money and my late husband's life insurance. I get to decide who lives here." There was a pause, and when Jackson spoke again, his voice had a hard edge I had never heard before. "Let me be clear, Eloise. This is happening. If you do not like it, you can move back to the city. There are plenty of small apartments for single older women." I felt as if I had been slapped. "I need to speak to Amanda," I managed to say. "She agrees with me," Jackson said smugly. "She understands family obligations even if you do not." "Put her on the phone, please." There was a rustling sound, and then Amanda's voice, small and uncertain. "Mom!" "Amanda, is this true? Are you supporting this ridiculous plan to move Jackson's parents into my home without my permission?" She hesitated. "Mom, I know it seems sudden, but they really do need help. It would only be temporary, maybe a few months at most." "That is not the point, Amanda. This is my home. My sanctuary. You know how much this place means to me." "I do, Mom, but—" Her voice trailed off, and I could picture her looking at Jackson for guidance. "But family has to come first, right? You always taught me that." "This is not about family, Amanda. This is about respect and boundaries. Your husband is trying to bully me out of my own home." "No one is trying to bully you. Amanda protested weakly. "We are just trying to find a solution that works for everyone. A solution would involve asking me, not telling me. A solution would respect my right to decide who lives in my own home." Jackson's voice cut in clearly, having taken the phone back. "Enough of this, Eloise. You are being selfish and ungrateful. This cabin should benefit the whole family, not just you." "It is not a family property, Jackson. It is my home." "Well, my parents already have the keys, so this discussion is pointless." My blood ran cold. "What did you say?" "I had copies made from Amanda's set when we visited. They will be using them when they arrive next month." The betrayal was so shocking, I could barely breathe. My own daughter had allowed this man to make copies of my house keys without my knowledge or permission. "That is illegal," I managed to say. "You cannot just give people keys to someone else's house." Jackson laughed. "Are you going to call the police on family, Eloise? That would make for an interesting holiday gathering." "I want to speak to Amanda again. She is upset right now because of your selfishness. Look, this is happening, whether you like it or not. My parents will arrive on June 15th. You can either welcome them graciously or make things difficult for everyone, especially Amanda. Your choice." With that, he hung up. I sat staring at the phone in my hand, tears welling in my eyes. I immediately called Amanda back, but the call went straight to voicemail. I tried 3 more times with the same result. That night was one of the longest of my life. I lay awake replaying the conversation in my head, feeling waves of hurt, betrayal, and fear wash over me. How could Amanda allow this? How could she choose her husband's bullying over her own mother's well-being? I thought about the life I had built here, the peace I had found after losing Walter, the friends I was making, the art I was creating. The thought of Harold and Patricia Tanner invading my space, rearranging my things, taking over my spare room, possibly never leaving, made me physically ill. All my life I had been the accommodating one. The teacher who took on extra students when classrooms were overcrowded, the wife who gave up her own dreams so Walter could pursue his career, the mother who put her daughter's needs above her own at every turn. For 67 years, I had been the one to bend, to give in, to sacrifice. As the first light of dawn filtered through my bedroom window, I made a decision. Not this time, not with this dream, not with my home. This time, Eloise Johnson was going to stand her ground. I got out of bed as the sun was rising, made myself a strong cup of coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with a notebook. If Jackson wanted war, I would give him one, but I would fight it my way with planning and intelligence rather than bullying and threats. "No more sacrificing myself," I wrote at the top of the page. For 40 years I had taught children to stand up to bullies, yet here I was allowing myself to be bullied in my own home. The irony was not lost on me. My first step was to call a local attorney. Martha Reynolds came highly recommended by Harriet, my neighbor. She specialized in property law and elder issues. I explained my situation, including the illegal key copying, and asked for her advice. "First things first," Martha said after listening carefully. "Change your locks immediately. It is your property, and no one has the right to enter without your permission, family or not." That afternoon, I drove to the hardware store where Tom and David helped me select new high-security locks for all the doors. David even offered to come install them for me. And while we are at it, he suggested, "Let us put in a security camera at the front door. You can monitor it from your phone." By evening, my cabin had new locks and a discreet camera over the front door that would alert me to any visitors. I felt a small sense of security return, though I knew this was just the beginning. The next day, I visited Martha at her office. She helped me draft a formal letter to Jackson and his parents, clearly stating that they did not have permission to move into my home. She also prepared a detailed list of local rental options that would be suitable for Harold and Patricia. "If they do show up and refuse to leave, Martha, advise do not engage in a physical confrontation. Call the sheriff's office immediately. I have already spoken to Sheriff Braddock about the situation and he is aware that you might need assistance." The thought of having to call the police on my daughters-in-laws was horrifying, but I needed to be prepared for every possibility. Over the next few days, I spoke with several of my new friends in the mountain community about my situation. I was initially embarrassed to share such personal problems, but their support was overwhelming. Harriet, in particular, became my strongest ally. At 75, she had survived 2 husbands and had no patience for what she called entitled nonsense. "You listen to me, Eloise," she said, as we walked along her favorite trail. "I have seen this kind of thing before. If you give them an inch, they will take the whole damn cabin. You stand firm." With Harriet's encouragement, I continued my preparations. I researched local short-term rentals and found several options that were affordable and available immediately. I printed out the listings complete with photos and contact information, ready to present them as alternatives. Then I turned my attention to the spare bedroom. If despite all my efforts, Harold and Patricia did manage to force their way into my home, they would need to understand exactly what they were getting into. I spent an entire day transforming the room according to a very specific vision. I created a detailed list of house rules covering everything from quiet hours beginning at 7 p.m. to bathroom schedules. They would have access from 6 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. to 7:30 p.m., only to kitchen use vegetarian meals. Only no cooking after 5 p.m. I framed this list and hung it prominently on the wall. I moved most of my art supplies into the room, setting up my easel directly in the center, surrounded by shelves of paints, brushes, and canvases. I replaced the comfortable guest bed with a small, narrow pull-out sofa that would barely fit one person, let alone 2. On the walls I hung several of my more experimental paintings, including an oversized portrait of Walter that seemed to stare accusingly at anyone who entered the room. I added framed quotes about boundaries, self-respect, and the importance of personal space. I printed out a weekly schedule, showing all the activities that would take place in the common areas, my daily 5 a.m. meditation in the living room, the twice-weekly yoga group. I was planning to host the book club meetings every Friday evening and the monthly gatherings of 6 retired teachers from my old school who had promised to visit regularly. Finally, I drew up a formal rental agreement with Martha's help that specified a substantial monthly rent required adherence to all house rules and clearly stated that the arrangement was temporary and could be terminated with 32nd days' notice by either party. The transformation complete, I stood back and surveyed my work with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. It broke my heart that I had to go to such lengths to protect my home from my own family, but at the same time I felt a growing sense of empowerment. For perhaps the first time in my life I was putting myself first, and it felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Throughout this period I tried repeatedly to reach Amanda. Most of my calls went unanswered, but occasionally she would pick up sounding stressed and defensive. Our conversations were strained, with Amanda vacillating between apologizing for the situation and trying to convince me to accept it. "Mom, please try to understand," she would plead. "Jackson is under so much pressure with his parents. This would solve everything." At the expense of my happiness, I would respond, "Amanda, this is wrong, and deep down you know it." These conversations always ended the same way, with Amanda promising to work on Jackson, but ultimately making no commitments to stand up to him. As June 15th approached, my anxiety grew. Would they actually show up, despite my clear objections? Would my daughter stand by while her husband and his family invaded my home? Would I have the strength to stand my ground if confronted in person? Then, 3 days before the 15th, I received the call I had been dreading. It was Amanda, her voice, tight with tension. "Mom, I just wanted to let you know that Harold and Patricia are on their way. They left Denver this morning with a moving truck." My heart pounded, but my voice remained steady. "I have made it very clear they are not welcome to move in, Amanda. My locks have been changed, and I have prepared alternative housing options for them." "Mom, please do not make this difficult," she begged. "Jackson is furious about the locks. He says you are being ridiculous." "What Jackson thinks is irrelevant. This is my home, and I decide who lives in it." There was a pause, then Amanda said quietly, "We are coming too. Jackson wants to handle this in person." "I expected as much," I replied. "I will be waiting." As I hung up the phone, I took a deep breath and looked around at my beloved cabin. Whatever happened in the next few days would determine whether this remained my sanctuary or became a battleground. I was scared, but I was also ready. Harriet called an hour later to check on me, and when I told her what was happening, she insisted on coming over. You should not face them alone, she said firmly. I will be there first thing tomorrow. That night I slept surprisingly well. I had done everything I could to prepare, and now it was time to stand my ground. As I drifted off to sleep, I remembered something Walter used to say. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. Tomorrow would test my courage like nothing ever had before. The moving truck appeared at the end of my driveway just after 10 the next morning. Harriet had arrived an hour earlier, bringing her famous blueberry muffins and a resolve that strengthened my own. We sat at the kitchen table watching through the window as the large white truck lumbered up the gravel drive, followed by a silver sedan I recognized as belonging to Harold and Patricia. "Remember," Harriet said, squeezing my hand. "This is your home. You have every right to decide who lives here." I nodded, took a deep breath, and walked to the door. My security camera had already alerted me to their arrival, and I watched on my phone as Harold emerged from the sedan, stretching his back and surveying my property with an air of ownership that made my blood boil. Patricia followed, looking nervous and uncomfortable. They approached my front door, and Harold reached into his pocket, presumably for the copied key. I opened the door before he could try it in the lock. "Hello, Harold, Patricia," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I have been expecting you." Harold seemed taken aback by my appearance at the door. He was a tall man with a perpetual frown and the same calculating eyes as his son. "Eloise," he said, recovering quickly, "we are here to move in. The movers need to know where to put our things." "I am afraid there has been a misunderstanding," I said, not moving from the doorway. "As I have made clear to Jackson and Amanda, I am not accepting roommates at this time." Harold's face reddened. "Now see here, Eloise. Jackson told us everything was arranged. We have sold our condo. We have nowhere else to go." "That is not entirely true," I replied. "I have researched several suitable rentals in the area. I would be happy to share that information with you." Patricia placed a restraining hand on her husband's arm. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside, Harold," she suggested, eyeing Harriet, who had appeared behind me. I hesitated, then nodded. "You may come in for a discussion, yes, but the movers will need to wait." Harold looked like he wanted to argue, but Patricia was already stepping past me into the cabin. I introduced them to Harriet, who nodded coolly, but said nothing, maintaining her position as silent support. Once we were seated in the living room, I handed Harold the folder of rental options. "These are all available immediately," I explained. "The one on Pine Creek Drive even allows month-to-month leases, so you would not be locked into anything long-term." Harold barely glanced at the folder before tossing it onto the coffee table. "This is ridiculous. Jackson assured us we would be living here. He said you had plenty of space and were happy to help family." "Then Jackson lied to you," I said bluntly. "I have never agreed to this arrangement. In fact, I have repeatedly stated that it will not work for me." "And why not?" Harold demanded. "You are living here all alone. There is plenty of room. We are family." "This is my home," I said simply. "I worked my entire life to afford this place. I get to decide who lives here." Patricia, who had been examining my living room with a critical eye, finally spoke. "It is a lovely cabin, Eloise. We would of course pay rent." "It is not about money," I explained. "It is about boundaries and respect. I cherish my privacy and independence. I have built a life here that suits me perfectly." "Privacy?" Harold scoffed. "What does an old woman need privacy for?" Harriet made a small noise of outrage, but I held up a hand to stop her from intervening. "I may be old, Harold, but I am entitled to live as I choose, just as you are." "This is absurd," Harold said, pulling out his phone. "I am calling Jackson. He will sort this out." While Harold stepped outside to make the call, Patricia looked at me apologetically. "I told Harold we should have called first. Jackson assured us everything was arranged." "Jackson has no authority to make arrangements regarding my home," I said gently, feeling a bit sorry for her. She seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the situation. Harold stormed back in his face triumphant. "Jackson and Amanda are on their way. They were already planning to come help us move in." "That does not change anything," I said. "This is still my home." "We will see about that," Harold muttered, sitting down heavily on my sofa. The next hour was excruciating. Harold alternated between making thinly veiled threats about taking legal action and complaining about the inconvenience. Patricia mostly stayed silent occasionally, trying to smooth things over with compliments about my decor or questions about the local area. Harriet remained a steady presence beside me, refilling our coffee cups and giving me reassuring nods. Finally, the sound of another car on the gravel driveway broke the tension. Moments later, Jackson burst through the door without knocking, Amanda trailing behind him with a worried expression. "What is going on here?" Jackson demanded, glaring at me. "Why are the movers still waiting outside?" "Because no one is moving in," I said, standing up to face him. "As I have told you repeatedly, I am not agreeing to this arrangement." Jackson's face contorted with anger. "You changed the locks," he accused. "Do you know how childish that is?" "No, Jackson. What is childish is making copies of someone's keys without their permission and giving them to other people." Amanda stepped forward, her eyes darting nervously between her husband and me. "Mom, please. Can we just talk about this calmly? I am sure we can figure something out that works for everyone." "I have already offered a solution," I said, gesturing to the folder of rental options. "There are several suitable places available right now." "We cannot afford those places," Jackson snapped. "Not with Denver prices what they are now." "That is not my problem to solve," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I sympathize with your situation, but moving into my home against my wishes is not the answer." Harold stood up, joining his son. "This is family, Eloise. Family takes care of each other. Amanda understands that, even if you do not." At the mention of her name, Amanda looked down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. "Is that true, Amanda?" I asked quietly. "Do you think it is right for your husband to bully your mother out of her own home?" "No one is bullying anyone," Jackson interjected before Amanda could answer. "We are trying to find a solution to a difficult situation." "A solution would involve asking, not telling," I replied. "A solution would respect my right to decide who lives in my own home." "Enough of this," Jackson said, his voice rising. "Harold, Patricia, go tell the movers to start bringing in your things." "They will not be allowed in," I said firmly. "And if you attempt to force your way in, I will call the sheriff. I have already spoken to him about this situation." That stopped Jackson in his tracks. He stared at me in disbelief, then turned to Amanda. "Did you hear that your mother is threatening to call the police on your family?" Amanda looked torn, her eyes filling with tears. "Mom, please do not do this. There has to be a way we can work this out." I softened my tone slightly. "There is Amanda. Your in-laws can rent one of these properties, and we can all maintain a respectful relationship. I am happy to have them visit to have family dinners to be part of their lives. But I will not be forced out of my own home or coerced into a living arrangement I do not want." "This is an ultimatum," Jackson said coldly. "You should think carefully about what you are doing, Eloise. Either they stay, or you have lost your daughter." Amanda gasped. "Jackson, no. That is not fair." I felt my heart breaking at his threat, but Harriet's presence beside me gave me strength. "That is not my ultimatum, Jackson. That is yours. And it is cruel to put Amanda in that position." For a moment, I almost wavered. The thought of losing my only child was almost unbearable. I looked at Amanda's tearful face and felt my resolve weakening. Then I remembered all the preparation I had done, all the strength I had gathered, and I straightened my shoulders. "Before you make any final decisions," I said, "I think you should see what I have prepared. I have set up the spare room for Harold and Patricia to see." All eyes turned to me in surprise. "You have prepared the room?" Patricia asked hopefully. In a manner of speaking, I replied, "Please follow me." I led the group down the hallway to the spare bedroom, feeling a strange calm descend over me. This was the moment of truth. Either my preparation would make them understand that I was serious, or things would escalate further. Either way, I was ready. "I wanted you to see exactly what you would be getting into if you insisted on moving in against my wishes," I said, placing my hand on the doorknob. I opened the door wide and stepped back, allowing everyone a clear view. The gasps were audible. What had once been a comfortable guest bedroom had been transformed into an art studio unlike any other. My easel stood proudly in the center of the room, surrounded by shelves overflowing with paints, brushes, canvases, and art supplies. The walls were covered with my more experimental paintings, including several abstract pieces in jarring colors and the oversized portrait of Walter that seemed to glare at anyone who entered. Where the queen-sized guest bed had once stood was now a small, narrow pull-out sofa that looked uncomfortable even to sit on, let alone sleep on. It was covered in paint splatters and surrounded by drop cloths. On one wall, I had hung the framed house rules, which detailed every restriction I could possibly think of. Quiet hours 7 p.m. to 9 a.m. No television, radio, or conversation above a whisper during these hours. Bathroom access 6 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. only. Emergency exceptions must be approved in advance. Kitchen use vegetarian meals only. No cooking after 5 p.m. All dishes must be washed, dried, and put away immediately after use. Common areas. See posted schedule for availability. During scheduled activities, residents must remain in their room. Guests. No visitors allowed without 72 hours advance notice and written approval. Daily activities. All residents must participate in morning meditation, 5 a.m. afternoon nature walks, minimum 3 miles, and evening reading hour. Next to this was the posted schedule of activities that would take place in the common areas, effectively making the house unusable to anyone but me for most of the day. On another wall hung the formal rental agreement, specifying a monthly rent that was nearly double what the local rentals would cost, along with a security deposit and strict clauses about adherence to house rules. And finally, perhaps most shocking of all, were the framed photos of the 6 retired teachers who would be visiting monthly, all stern-looking women in their 60s and 70s, who had been my colleagues for decades and had happily agreed to pose for these pictures when I explained the situation. Patricia was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is that a bed?" "It is a pull-out sofa," I corrected her. "It fits 1 person comfortably. 2 would be quite a squeeze, I imagine." Harold's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This is my art studio," I finished for him. "As I mentioned multiple times, I have been converting the spare room. I spend at least 6 hours a day in here. The light is perfect from about 9 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon." Jackson pushed past his parents to enter the room, staring at the house rules with growing outrage. No bathroom access, except for 2 30-minute periods mandatory hikes. This is insane. "These are my house rules," I said calmly. "Anyone living in my home would be expected to abide by them. I am an early riser who values quiet, cleanliness, and structure. My home reflects that." "This is ridiculous," Jackson exploded. "No one could live like this." "Exactly," I replied softly. The implication hung in the air between us. Jackson stared at me, finally understanding that this was my way of showing them I would not be bullied or manipulated. I would not be forced out of my own home, nor would I make it comfortable for unwanted residents. "You have been planning this all along," he accused. "I have been preparing for every possibility," I corrected him, including the possibility that my clear boundaries would be ignored. Amanda had been silent, taking in the transformed room with wide eyes. Now she turned to her husband. "Jackson, this is not going to work. We need to find another solution." "There is no other solution," Jackson snapped. "Your mother is being unreasonable and spiteful." At that moment, to everyone's surprise, Patricia started to laugh. It began as a small chuckle, but quickly grew into full-blown laughter that left her wiping tears from her eyes. "Oh, Harold," she gasped between laughs. "She outplayed us completely. Can you imagine us trying to live here with these rules with that bed?" Harold did not seem to share his wife's amusement. His face was still red, but now there was a hint of grudging respect in his eyes as he looked at me. "You went to a lot of trouble to make your point, Eloise." "It was no trouble at all," I assured him. "This is genuinely how I use this room, and these are genuinely the conditions under which I would accept housemates if I were ever to do so." Jackson was still fuming, pacing the small space between the easel and the pull-out sofa. "This is not over," he threatened. We will figure something else out. I have already figured something out, I reminded him, gesturing to the folder of rental options I had brought with me. Several suitable alternatives that would give Harold and Patricia their own space while keeping the family connected. Jackson snatched the folder from my hand and stormed out of the room. "Come on," he called over his shoulder. "We are leaving. All of us. Now." Harold followed immediately, his back stiff with injured pride. Patricia paused at the door, giving me an unreadable look before following her husband. Amanda hesitated, torn between following her husband and staying with her mother. In that moment, I saw the little girl she had once been, always trying to please everyone, always caught in the middle. "I love you," I told her softly, "but this is my home." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks, and turned to follow the others. I heard the front door slam moments later, followed by angry voices outside, as Jackson presumably instructed the movers to leave. Harriet, who had been watching silently from the hallway, came to stand beside me. "You did it," she said, squeezing my shoulder. "I am so proud of you." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I had won, but at what cost? As I heard the cars starting up outside, I wondered if I had just lost my daughter forever. The days following the confrontation were some of the loneliest I had experienced since Walter died. Amanda did not call, and my attempts to reach her went straight to voicemail. I tried to return to my routine, painting in my studio, walking the mountain trails, reading in my loft, but everything was colored by a sense of loss and doubt. Had I done the right thing? Was standing my ground worth the potential estrangement from my only child? Harriet checked on me daily, sometimes bringing food, other times just sitting with me in companionable silence. Tom and David from the hardware store stopped by with a bottle of wine and reassurances that I had done nothing wrong. Even Martha, my attorney, called to see how I was doing. "You stood up for yourself," she reminded me. "That is never wrong, Eloise." A week after the confrontation, I received an unexpected email from Patricia. She told me that she and Harold had found a small rental cabin in town, just 10 minutes from my place. It was one of the options I had included in my folder, the one with month-to-month leases. "I want to apologize for our part in this unfortunate situation," she wrote. "Harold and I should never have allowed Jackson to make arrangements without speaking to you directly. We were desperate and took the easy way out, but that is no excuse for trying to take over your home." Her email gave me a small measure of hope. Perhaps all was not lost. Perhaps with time wounds could heal and relationships could be rebuilt, but on a foundation of mutual respect rather than manipulation and coercion. Another week passed, and then another. I began to settle back into my life, finding joy again in my painting, my garden, my new friendships. The security camera remained, but I no longer jumped every time my phone alerted me to someone in the driveway. Then, on a rainy afternoon in July, nearly a month after the confrontation, my phone rang. It was Amanda. "Mom," she said, her voice small and uncertain. "Can we meet for coffee? Just the two of us?" We arranged to meet at a small cafe in town the next day. I arrived early, my stomach in knots, unsure what to expect. When Amanda walked in, I was shocked by her appearance. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes and a tension in her shoulders that had not been there before. We ordered coffee and sat at a corner table, both of us struggling to find the right words to begin. "I am sorry," Amanda finally said, staring into her cup. "I am so sorry, Mom. I should never have let Jackson treat you that way. I should have stood up for you." "Why did not you?" I asked gently. She sighed. "I do not know. I have been asking myself that same question for weeks. I think I have gotten used to giving in to Jackson to keep the peace. He can be so forceful, so sure he is right. It is easier to go along than to fight." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I understand that better than you might think. For most of my life I was the same way. Always accommodating, always putting others first." "What changed?" she asked. "I did," I said simply. "After your father died, I realized that if I did not start living for myself, my entire life would slip by without me ever knowing what I truly wanted. This cabin, this new life, it is the first thing I have ever done purely for my own happiness." Amanda nodded slowly. When you showed us that room with all those rules and the tiny bed, I suddenly saw how ridiculous the whole situation was. Jackson was asking you to give up your dream, your space, your peace, just to solve his parents' problem, and I was letting him do it. It took me a long time to learn how to set boundaries, I told her. To understand that loving others does not mean sacrificing yourself completely. Jackson is still angry, she admitted. He feels like you made a fool of him in front of his parents. And how do you feel? I asked, bracing myself for her answer. She met my eyes directly. I am proud of you, Mom. You stood up for yourself in a way I have never been able to. It has made me think about a lot of things in my marriage, about patterns I have not wanted to see. We talked for hours that afternoon, more openly and honestly than we had in years. Amanda shared her growing concerns about Jackson's controlling behavior not just with me, but with her as well. I shared stories from my marriage to her father, the good and the bad, the compromises that worked, and those that did not. I do not know what is going to happen with Jackson and me, she said, as we finally prepared to leave. But I do know I want you in my life, Mom. I want to rebuild what we had. I want that too, I assured her. Over the following months, our relationship began to heal. We met regularly for coffee or lunch, sometimes just the two of us, sometimes with Harriet or other friends I had made in the mountain community. Occasionally, Patricia would join us. To my surprise, she and I developed a cautious friendship bonding over our shared love of gardening and our experiences as mothers-in-law. Harold was slower to come around, but by Thanksgiving he had thought enough to accept my invitation to dinner. I hosted the holiday meal at my cabin, setting up a long table in the living room, with views of the snow-covered mountains. Jackson came too, still somewhat cold toward me, but civil enough for Amanda's sake. After dinner, Patricia pulled me aside. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Not just for dinner, but for not giving in. If you had let us move in, it would have been a disaster for everyone, including Harold and me. We needed to stand on our own feet, not become dependent on our son or his family." Even Harold, after a few glasses of wine, grudgingly admitted that their rental cabin suited them better than they had expected. "And the monthly lease gives us time to figure out our next steps," he added. "We are thinking of looking at places in Arizona. Warm weather would be good for my arthritis." As for Jackson, I held little hope that he and I would ever be close. But for Amanda's sake, I maintained a polite relationship. What mattered most was that Amanda was finding her voice, setting her own boundaries, both with her husband and with others. Whether her marriage would survive, these changes remained to be seen, but I was proud of her growing strength. My life in the mountains continued to flourish. My paintings began selling at a small gallery in town. I expanded my garden to include a greenhouse for winter vegetables, and my circle of friends grew steadily. Harriet remained my closest confidant, her blunt wisdom and unwavering support a constant in my new life. The second bedroom remained my art studio, though I did eventually replace the uncomfortable pull-out sofa with a daybed that could accommodate overnight guests when I chose to invite them. The house rules came down, no longer necessary now that my boundaries were understood and respected. On the anniversary of my confrontation with Jackson and his parents, I sat on my porch with my morning coffee, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold, just as I had envisioned when I first bought this place. I reflected on everything that had happened, on the strength I had found within myself at 67, on the peace that came from authentic boundaries rather than appeasement. All my life, I had believed that loving others meant always putting their needs first. What I had finally learned in my retirement years was that true love, both for others and for oneself, begins with respect. Respect for your own needs, your own dreams, your own space. And paradoxically, by standing firm in that self-respect, I had ultimately fostered more genuine, healthy relationships with everyone in my life, even those who had initially resented my boundaries. As I watched a pair of eagles soaring above the mountains, I thought about all the women my age who might be facing similar challenges, finding themselves expected to sacrifice their hard-earned peace for others' convenience. I wished I could tell them all what I had learned, that it is never too late to stand up for yourself, to reclaim your power, to insist on the respect you deserve. Have you ever had to stand your ground against a family member who tried to take advantage of you, or found yourself at a crossroads where you had to choose between peace at any cost and standing up for yourself? I would love to hear your and stories in the comments below. And if this tale of late blooming courage resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who might need to hear that it is never too late to set boundaries. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the most important relationship you will ever have is the one with yourself.